Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at the 2024 election map between the rematch of Donald Trump and Joe Biden, but based off June polling averages alone. But before we get started, make sure you guys are subscribed as we're approaching 3,000 and click the bell so you don't miss out on any of my content. Also, we have memberships. You can find a link to that in the description section. Now back to the topic of today's video. I'm going to be filling out every single swing and battleground state based off of the June polling averages alone. This is not my prediction. This has nothing to do with my opinions. This is going to be based off of the data and what the polls say as of this month if the election was held in June. And by the way, we have the first debate coming in like 2 weeks. So right off the bat, both states, Ohio and Iowa, are solid red for Donald Trump. He should win that by over 10 points by a safe red margin at the end of the day. I think after the indictments, I think that should really push both of those states even farther to the right. I think it will bring in more enthusiasm among the Republican base. And then as for the state of Colorado, this is typically considered a swing state, but Joe Biden clearly has the upper hand here. He is heavily favored in some of these polls. When you take a look at polling averages of the month of June, he's up by 7 points, which is a likely margin. But when you factor in other things with that, he's actually up by 11 points. So he actually is cracking double digits in the state of Colorado, just how he did in 2020. This state's actually going further to the left. And then as for New Mexico, this state is also pretty much a likely Biden state. According to June polling averages, if the election is held today, Joe Biden is projected to win the state of New Mexico by nearly 9 percentage points. But when you take a look at polling averages alone, and you don't factor in those other things, he's only up by nearly 8%. So it's still a likely margin, does not matter at the end of the day. And then as for New Jersey, this state's actually surprisingly closer than what some people may think. So according to polling averages alone, Biden has a lead of exactly 7 points in this state. Now keep in mind that he won this by 16% back in the 2020 election. But one thing to factor or keep in mind is that we had COVID. Another thing is that Biden had major celebrity endorsements, which he's not going to anymore. A lot of them regret endorsing him or they won't. And some of them might even actually endorse Donald Trump. You just saw what Jake Paul or Logan Paul did. Even people like The Rock have publicly stated they regret publicly endorsing Joe Biden. So at the end of the day, according to the polling averages alone, which is what this video is based off of, Joe Biden's going to win New Jersey by a likely margin instead of a safe, which is what he's supposed to win it by. The state of Texas, Donald Trump is projected to win it by 10.4%, according to polling averages if the election was held today in June. But when you factor in other things like betting markets and expert ratings, that margin does narrow up, but he's still up by a likely margin of 8%. But this video is based off of polling averages alone. With that being said, Trump's going to win Texas by a greater margin than he is in Florida. Florida is actually going to be likely, according to polling averages, which was closer than Texas would be. Because in my opinion, I think Florida would actually vote to the right of Texas, but what polling averages are suggesting, this will be redder than Florida this coming November, which I disagree with. Really 8% according to the projected margin and polling averages, which is going to be slightly closer than a state like Texas would be, which I just disagree with. And Donald Trump is expected to perform very well among Hispanic voters, especially in some of these Sunbelt states with a border crisis like Texas, especially Cuban Americans to be specific, and Miami-Dade County flipped red to DeSantis in the 2022 midterms. So Trump overall with those type of voters should be, do better among them than he did just 4 years ago. And also the state of Virginia is going to be way closer than where it was back in 2020. According to polling averages, Biden's lead, surprisingly, is at 0.4%, according to polling averages if the election was held today in June. This is disastrous for the incumbent president. But if you factor in other things, not just polling averages, but betting markets as well, and expert ratings, Biden's lead, increases significantly to 9 to maybe even 11 points. So that projected margin comes to a total of 8%. But this video is based off of polling averages alone. So with that being said, he's only winning it by a tilt margin, and a new Virginia poll actually showed it a tie between Trump and Biden at 42 to 42%. So he's going to win this state by a tilt margin according to polling averages alone. When you take away, you don't factor in betting markets, you don't factor in expert ratings, but you only take a look at the polling averages alone, his lead is at 0.4%, which is scary news, considering that he won it by literally 10 to 11 points just 4 years ago, and now he's only winning it by 0.4% according to polling averages. That is disastrous numbers for Joe Biden. And I also want to get these districts out of the way. So Nebraska's second will go to Joe Biden by a lean margin in 2024. And then also Maine's at-large would actually be likely for Joe Biden. He's going to win it by like 7 points according to polling averages instead of safe. And I think if that happens, if Maine's at-large does narrow up, it's probably because independent candidates tend to do well in this state. And maybe if they get a large vote share, which independent candidates do perform better in the state of Maine, I think RFK can take away a lot of that support from Biden, which will result in Maine's at-large being a lot closer than you may expect. The state of North Carolina, Donald Trump is expected to do better than he did in his 2016 performance. And keep in mind, that goes to show you that this state's a lot more redder than what people may think. Because when Georgia and Arizona flipped to Biden in 2020, North Carolina did the exact opposite, and it stayed red for Trump. He won that by 1.5%. So according to polling averages, he's going to win this state by 6.5%, substantially better than his 2016 and 2020 margin. But when you factor in other things like betting markets, for example, and also expert ratings, that margin still narrows up, but he still wins it by a lean margin at the end of the day by literally 3%. So whether it's 3 or 6 points, doesn't really matter. Donald Trump is on track to, actually expand his margin in the state of North Carolina from his 2020, percent in this state. So North Carolina is going to get redder according to the polls from 2020. And regardless if Mark Robinson does or does not win on the governorship, Donald Trump is expected at the end of the day to still outperform him substantially. This is held today. Donald Trump is expected to win the deep southern state of Georgia, according to polling averages from the month of June, by exactly 5 percentage points. But take a look at betting markets and you factor in expert ratings, it gets a little bit closer, but he still wins it by a lean margin of 2.2%. So whether it's 2 or 5%, just like in North Carolina, he's still going to flip this state, actually, because Biden won it by like 0.2%, roughly 10,000 votes, which is extremely narrow of a margin, and it's more than likely going to flip to Donald Trump's column, considering that Trump is also expected, just like for Hispanic voters, also black African-American voters, to do way better than where he did among that group just 4 years ago. Biden got nearly 90% among African-American voters, and now he might drop to as low as 80%. And if Trump is lucky enough, he only gets like 70% among that minority group. And Trump is polling at nearly 20 points. And that may seem low, but it's actually enough to actually win the election, surpass 270 electoral votes, especially flip the state of Georgia. If Biden does not hold up to his numbers in some of these strong Democratic counties, for example, Atlanta, the metropolitan area, the suburbs in there, then he's probably not going to win the state again because the margin of error for Biden was extremely close. And he was the first Democrat to win it since like Bill Clinton. So he's definitely more than likely not going to hold on to the state of Georgia in 2024. Trump should flip that. And that's exactly what the polls are reflecting in this state. And the New Hampshire is kind of an interesting one because Biden's projected margin is nearly 7%, which is way better than where he's polling at in any other swing state. Biden is doing better in New Hampshire than where he is in Pennsylvania, even a state like Wisconsin, even. Like this state, I think he might be able to do very well in. But keep in mind, one thing to mention is that this state is really anti-incumbent, and Joe Biden is the incumbent, Donald Trump is the challenger, so that alone can sway this race in favor of the former president. When you take a look at polling averages of the month of June, Biden wins, New Hampshire by 3 points, which is going to be considered a lean margin in 2024 if the election was held in June. And then as for Nevada, Biden won the state by 2 points back in 2020. And one thing to mention is that he did not perform better than Hillary Clinton's margin in this state. They won this state, both of them, by exactly, literally the same amount. And considering that when you saw a major shift towards the left in favor of Biden back in 2020 in states like Georgia, Arizona, the Rust Belt states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, those severely went heavy favor of Biden. But Nevada, the shift there was not that different from Hillary Clinton. In fact, it did not go to the left than Hillary Clinton's margin in the state. And current polling averages has Trump up by 4.6% in the state of Nevada, which is going to be considered a lean margin in 2024. And if Trump is able to flip Washoe County, Reno, Nevada, I think he's on track to win this state. And if Biden does not hold up to his numbers in Clark County, the Vegas area, a Democratic stronghold, which is basically the only thing holding Trump back from actually winning the state, then I think Trump's going to win Nevada in 2024 if Trump is able to peel a lot of that support away from Biden, if he's able to perform better among Hispanics, Asians. I think he's definitely on track to win Nevada in 2024. And then even a state like Minnesota, Biden is not expected to do as well as he did in 2020, considering that he does not have that BLM momentum. It really pushed the suburbs here to the left 4 years ago. Now, don't get me wrong, Minnesota is still a left trendy state, but considering Biden's popularity is just so low, he's sitting at a below 40% approval rating. He's at 38% in terms of approval. Current polling averages has him winning the state by literally less than 2 points, 1.7% to be exact. Now, I do want to be honest that this state actually underestimated, believe it or not, Biden's support back in 2020 by roughly 3%. So if you apply that polling error, he's going to win Minnesota by 4 to 5 points on average. When you factor in betting markets and expert ratings, his projected margin comes to a total of 6.5%. But because I'm basing this video off of polling averages alone, he's going to end up winning Minnesota by a lean margin in 2024 of literally 1.7%. According to polling averages. Now, don't get me wrong. If you take a look at anything else, for example, betting markets, he's winning the state by 10 points, which is greater than his 2020 margin in the state, which this is not accurate. I don't trust betting markets whatsoever. Expert ratings, still a little bit more accurate than betting market, but still, I just don't believe he's going to win it by what he got in 2020. Actually, more. He won it by 7 points. Exit ratings has him winning it by 8.4. That's just not going to happen, considering the nationwide trend that we're seeing very well favoring Donald Trump in this election. And then as for the border state of Arizona, keep in mind immigration is a very important issue in this election specifically, impacting a lot of these voters. And Biden is disapproved of on the issue of immigration more than any other, despite the economy and inflation. So with that being said, according to polling averages, Trump's going to win the state by an exact margin of 4% if the election was held in June. When you take a look at the projected margin, when you factor in those other things like betting markets and expert ratings, his margin narrows down to 1%, but it's still going to be a flip by a lean margin for the former president. I think if Trump is able to perform very well among the neocons, the establishment party of Arizona, the McCain lovers, the Mitt Romneys of the Republican Party in Arizona, and independents as well, and also Hispanic voters, I think Trump is on track to win the state in 2024. Move on to the Rust Belt states before I end off this video, starting off with Wisconsin, in which if the election was held today, according to polling averages, Trump's going to win the state by a tilt margin extremely narrow of 0.1%. And keep in mind that Biden won the state by 20,000 votes. So if Trump flips 20,000, he already wins this state, which I think is not that hard to do. If Biden does not hold up to his numbers in some of these stronghold Democratic counties like Milwaukee, which Donald Trump literally just bashed the day I'm recording this. He literally made fun of Milwaukee, calling it a terrible city, I believe. But if Trump does end up performing strong in some of these Republican stronghold counties, for example, Green Bay, I think he might win Wisconsin. And when you factor in betting markets, Biden actually wins the state by 0.6%. But when you average all of these factors out, it comes to a projected margin of 0.8% for the former president. So at the end of the day, Trump's going to win Wisconsin if the election was held in June. And then as for Michigan, keep in mind that Trump received more votes than Biden in the state of Michigan in the primaries, on top of the 100,000 people that already voted uncommitted in the Democratic primaries. And Donald Trump was actually facing an opponent like Nikki Haley, and Biden had no primary contest, while he's an incumbent that still received less votes than Donald Trump. It literally shows that there is no enthusiasm among the Democratic base to support Biden in this state. And if that's the case, he might not win this. But considering that the governor here endorsed Biden, Gretchen Whitmer, who is very popular, I think she can possibly carry him to a victory at the end of the day. It's enough to carry him over the hump, and I think Biden's margin in the state was great enough to possibly win him it again in 2024. Back in 2020, he won it by nearly 3%. So considering that margin, which is more than Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, I think he might win the state. And according to polling averages, Trump is actually winning it by 0.7%. But here's the thing. When you factor in betting markets, Biden wins it by nearly 2 points. When you factor in expert ratings, he wins it by 0.7. So when you factor in all those things and not just polling averages alone, Biden actually is the victor by a very small margin of 0.6%. So theoretically, Biden's narrowly going to win Michigan by a tilt margin of under a percentage point in this year's election cycle. And I honestly think the Detroit suburbs here are shifting heavily towards the left. I think the woman vote can really severely help Biden at the end of the day. If issues like abortion really drive these voters to the polls, I think that is exactly what carries Biden to a victory. And the last and final state to cover before I end off this video is Biden's own home state, Pennsylvania. This month, Donald Trump wins Biden's home state by 1.5%, which is not good news for the incumbent president. If Trump is able to flip Erie County, which Nikki Haley actually did very well in this county in the primaries when she literally dropped out, which is kind of scary for Trump, then I think if Trump wins this county, then he's going to win Pennsylvania. And if Biden loses tremendous support in Central County, right here, my cursor is pointing at, then I think Donald Trump's on track to win this state. And I think it really comes down to issues like the economy, inflation. Are you poorer than where you were 4 years ago? Like literally. And if Biden does not hold up to his numbers in some of these Democratic stronghold counties, and the suburbs are very important when it comes to these Rust Belt states, like the Philadelphia and Pittsburgh suburbs are very important for a Biden or Trump victory for both of these candidates. So with that being said, ultimately Donald Trump's going to win Pennsylvania by a very close margin, a tilt margin in 2024 if the election is held today, which is exactly what the polling averages are saying as of this month or June. So there you guys have it. If the election is held today, Donald Trump's going to win the election with 297 electoral votes, barely falling short of 300 to Joe Biden's 241, which will send him off to retirement. So keep in mind, this is not my prediction. This is exactly what the polls say as of June. So let me know your overall thoughts on this map in the comment section down below. What states you agree with or disagree with and why. And one last final reminder before I end off this video is to subscribe as you're approaching 3,000 and click the bell so you don't miss out on any of my content. Also, we have memberships. If you are interested in that, you can find a link in the description section. That's pretty much it. Thank you everyone for watching.